Okay, colleagues, let's make a start. Good morning, welcome to everyone. A reminder that you should switch your mobile phones off, please. Welcome to this, our 8th meeting of this session. Apologies this morning have been received from Mark Griffin, and Neil Bibby is here as his substitute. Neil has attended committee previously, so has already declared any interest that he has. The first item on our agenda is a decision whether to take item 7 in private. Can we agree to take item 7 on our agenda in private? Yes. Thank you very much. Item 2 on the agenda is Scottish Government Progress Report. This has been circulated to colleagues. This provides progress as requested from the Scottish Government on 2 reports previously considered. One is the overview of Scotland's criminal justice system from February last year, and the other is cardiology services from September last year. And this is one of a series of progress reports that we've asked, and the next one is one on management of patients on NHS waiting lists. So this is for the committee to consider, and happy to open this up for anyone who wants to comment. Yes, Willie. Sorry, Mr. Coffey.
Thanks very much, Convener. I was generally happy with the responses that we received, and my eye was drawn to the comments on cardiology services, and particularly relating to the Keep Well report there. I've picked out a paragraph in the main Keep Well report, Convener, at page 11. And for members' interest, it's all about availability of data again, and how we estimate value for money and outcomes and so on and so forth. And there's a section, an interesting section there, that describes for us how difficult it actually is to assess the success or otherwise of the programme overall by a single means or other means. But if you look at that paragraph, it talks again about the difficulty in gathering data and the lack of technical capacity in health boards to extract data and so on and so forth. It's an issue that we've raised a number of times, Convener, and I think I would say I was hoping for something a wee bit stronger than this to allow us and future committees the opportunity to assess the performance and success or otherwise of things like Keep Well. So it's a common message, I think, Convener, I suppose is what I'm saying to you. And I would like us to perhaps ask for this to be strengthened and to be looked at so that there's consistency across the NHS in gathering its data to allow us to properly scrutinise these matters.
I mean, I must admit I was very struck by the fact that there was a whole section in this report titled "Why is it so hard to tell if Keep Well is working?" which is a little worrying, really, isn't it? And that section on availability of data wasn't a significant part of that. That's true.
I mean, fundamentally, we need to be able to rely on consistency of data in any system to assess its effectiveness, and I think this is another example of this.
That was exactly the point that I picked up on page 3 of the report we have. It says the fact that Keep Well was not originally designed as a research study. I don't think that's any excuse for not having a bit of data and looking at where the money goes and what sort of outcomes are likely. But it does also say a single overall measure of effectiveness of Keep Well is not possible. And I remember in the evidence, and I think it was Willie Coffey and you, Convener, that met the GPs, but I do seem to remember the GPs in particular were quite sceptical about the amount of money that went to Keep Well and sort of implying that it could be better spent elsewhere. But having said that, and I do think this is unacceptable, the bottom paragraph on page 3 does say the outcomes analysis study is not yet complete. So I suppose I took some comfort from the fact that having spent a few millions, that they're now beginning to look at some sort of outcome analysis and auditing the trail of money to see whether it is an effective spend in terms of reducing inequalities and cardiology issues. But but like Willie, I felt this was an open admission. You know, it doesn't have to be a research study in order to have a decent trail of money and to see whether we are getting value for money and if it is effectively being spent. So I don't know if, I thought the outcome analysis, at least they are working on it, and the results will be reported in 2013-14. I don't know, it seems a long time, but I suppose something is happening,
Mr. Beattie,
albeit late.
Yeah, don't disagree with what Willie Coffey's been saying, and clearly there's an issue here again about availability of data, and as people are saying, this has been a problem that's come up again and again. We keep looking at a slice of it. Here we are looking at the Keep Well programme and saying, well, they should have better data keeping on that, maybe we should be asking them to improve that. Is there not a bigger problem here, really, that the legacy systems that we have in the public sector don't seem to be fit for the purpose that we need them for now, for the sort of information gathering and analysis that increasingly we're trying to look at more sophisticated analysis, better ways of doing things, and we're not getting the data extracted. And this really is a historic thing from these systems that were never set up really to cope with this. But I'm not sure how effective or how cost effective, time effective and so on we are looking at a slice at a time and saying this needs improved, that needs improved, when the reality is if we look across the whole thing, the whole public sector's got an issue on data gathering. And maybe we should be looking at whether it's possible to suggest that a long-term programme be put in place comprehensively across the public sector.
Thanks, Mr. Doris.
First, my apologies for being slightly late to committee this morning. Just a brief comment on this, really, and it is just impinging slightly on the kind of health committee remit again here and over a public audit committee. But when we do look at outcomes, and yes, I agree, we have to look at the best spend of money and quality outcomes. When we're talking about tackling health inequalities, I think it's reasonable to say that short-term outcome analysis is notoriously difficult in terms of healthcare, although it is important, and it's longer-term outcomes. So yeah, I commend our committee for continuing to scrutinise this, but we do have to caveat it and say that a long-term approach to tackling health inequalities is vital, and that just because you don't have very focused outcomes in a relatively short period of time is not a reason to stick into the long haul and tackling health inequalities. And just to put on record as well that the Health and Sport Committee is doing a significant inquiry in terms of health inequalities, and that's one of the things I think we'd be keen to look at is how you get the best outcome for your spend. But it's just to put on the record that we have to be in this for the long term, and we shouldn't rush to judge based on short term outcomes.
Can I ask if Keep Well was one of the programmes that the committee are likely to be looking at then? Yes, the short answer is yes, but I don't think we're going to specifically look at that. I think we'll look at it across more general themes. I think what I'd be keen to do would maybe have the Health and Sport Committee's clerks to update yourselves in relation to where we're going in relation to Keep Well, for your information, if that would be helpful. I'm sure that would. Anyone else?
Can I just say,
Yes,
it's not a case of short term or long term.
No.
There is no single overall measure of effectiveness. So I appreciate that inequalities is it's generational. I appreciate that. But next generation, there's still nothing to measure. There is no single overall measure of effectiveness. It's not possible.
Mr. Coffey.
Yeah.
Thanks very much again, Convener from Loon. I think it would be useful for the committee to have some understanding from, I don't know, the accountable officer perhaps, about how they see them evaluating something like Keep Well. I mean, I think it is doing an effective job, a really effective job, and it was established in 2006. And there are self-evaluation tools available to a range of organisations, so I would be expecting a wee bit more here, I think, at least in self-evaluation, to give us an indication of how they themselves think they're performing, and I'm pretty confident that they're actually doing quite well in the areas that we covered, Convener.
We can. I mean, we do need to decide how we deal with the progress report, and I mean, the obvious things that we can do, I guess, are simply to note what the progress report says, or to write to the accountable officer for further clarification. So, I mean, I think Mr. Coffey's made a specific suggestion there that we write to the accountable officer to pursue this point, which Mrs. Scanlon has also raised about, you know, how are they going to judge the success and, for our interest, the value for money of keeping well, given that the interim report does rather indicate that there are problems with that. So I'll come on to Mr. Beattie's point in a second, but can we agree to do that?
Yes.
I mean, I think Mr. Beattie makes a fair point that, and Mr. Coffey referred to this as well, that we do continually, whatever we're looking at, seem to come up against issues around data handling and ICT. I mean, I'm not sure exactly. I mean, to look at that across the public sector seems to me to be a very big piece of work. The other thing, of course, that we have to bear in mind is that we don't have it at our own hand to launch that kind of inquiry. Can I suggest that we consider writing to the Auditor General, and she's heard the exchange since she's in the public gallery, but we write to her formally and ask if there's any way in which Audit Scotland could look at that issue across the sector rather than constantly in slices, as Mr. Beattie described it. Would that be helpful? It seems quite a difficult undertaking to me, but I think Audit Scotland might have a view about how it could be done. Mr. Coffey.
Thanks again, Convener. It might be worthwhile getting a view from ISD as well. I mean, they have the broad picture of everything that's happening across the public sector, within health boards in particular, and they must have a view about the clarity and consistency of data that they get from different areas within the public services. It would be useful to get their take on this as well, I think.
Good. I think we could do that as well.
Yes.
So we agree to write in those terms to the accountable officer, who I guess will be Derek Feely at the NHS, with regard to keeping well, to the Auditor General about the possibility of that thematic investigation, and finally to ISD to ask that question. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Anything else on this progress report?
Can I just
yes,
ask,
Ms. Scanlon.
Do we get another, how regularly do we get the reports on the criminal justice system?
I think I'll ask for the clerk's advice on that, but I think we'd have to ask for a further progress report. This is the progress report we asked for.
Okay. So we don't get them as a
No.
regular course?
No.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let's move to item 3, which is correspondence from the Scottish Government with regard to the Section 23 report improving community planning in Scotland. So it's a response from the Minister for Local Government and Planning on the Improving Community Planning in Scotland report. I'll open this up for comments. It seemed to me that the key question we were asking was around the legislation, the Community Empowerment Bill, and the degree to which it would address some of the issues that we raised. And I have to say, I think there's a fairly straightforward answer here, that that is the legislative vehicle that the government sees for these changes. It's probably worth noting as well that the Local Government Committee is also looking at community planning and has had a copy of this correspondence as well, so they're aware of that exchange. Is there anything anyone wants to
Well, it does say that it's envisaged that the changes will be included in the Community Empowerment Bill, and that's creating a statutory duty and also formal requirements, so I think we just have to take this on trust.
Here,
Assume it will be included.
Just note this correspondence?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Item 4 is correspondence with regard to Scottish Teachers Superannuation Scheme, and this was following a letter we received from Mr. Swinney, drawing our attention to an error which had been made in the calculation of the liabilities for the Scottish Public Pensions Agency, and the committee wrote to Mr Swinney asking some questions about how the error had come to light and what impact there had been on public spending as a result of the mistake. We also wrote to the Auditor General to ask if she was satisfied that the checks and balances and so on were properly in place. And we have a response from both Mr Swinney and also following his request from the Government's Actuaries Department and from the Auditor General. So, the committee want to comment on this?
I think...
Yes, Ms Scanlon.
Can I just say, I think it's worth recording that this gentleman from the Actuaries Department was very upset and offers a full personal apology, and I think that's certainly graciously accept that. And also the 77 million, the last Audit Scotland report on pensions, the biggest deficit was the Teachers' Pension Fund, which was 240 million. So it's a significant amount in a fund that has the biggest deficit in the whole of the public sector. But, Convener, I just didn't quite understand the paragraph on page 2, the bottom line. The approach lacked a process checklist, etc. But
sorry, I'm not sure where we are.
Page 2.
Page 2. Oh.
The process they had lacked a...
sorry, this is the letter from
the
Government Actuaries Department. Okay.
Yes, the Government Actuary. The approach followed lacked a process checklist of the nature necessary for a team working away from the office. But it was really the next paragraph at the top of page 3, which said, having regard to the Scottish Government's requirement for actuarial support over the period to the independence referendum in 2014. And then it goes on. I wasn't entirely clear about how the government's requirements for actuarial support leading up to the referendum would impact on, you know, pensions and other things. And I just wondered whether it didn't give me reassurance. It led to a bit of doubt that this department seemed to be under a lot of pressure, and I just wonder if there are additional pressures because of the referendum, or if they do have all the staff that they need to carry out the job that they're doing.
Yes, Mr Dorn.
I think it make it quite clear that even if the Scottish Government was looking for them to do something extra in the run-up to the referendum, that they've said no. So there can't be under any extra pressure, basically, you know, round about the referendum. I'm not really sure why that's in there, but I don't see how you can read from it that the actuarial department could be under any extra pressure.
Let's say we have concluded it would not be appropriate for the foreseeable future
to
build up a team in the Edinburgh office with the necessary critical mass to provide that support. It just led to some doubt in my mind.
Anyone else want to? Yes, Mr Crowley.
Thanks, Convener. I just wanted to go back to the actual main issue. I don't know why the referendum thing is in there at all, but I think it's a refreshing change to read something like that from the actuary, Mr Llanwarn, I think it is, to apologise in those terms and to clearly indicate that it's not the fault of the Scottish Government. And it's very unusual, I suppose, for actuaries to get something like this wrong. But I just refer to the last sentence in the Auditor General's letter to you, Convener, saying it was really, there is no effect on the scheme's net, the pension scheme's net expenditure for the year or outturns in the Scottish budget. And it was basically the error affected, as I say, the element of valuation reflecting technical changes in actuarial assumptions. And I don't pretend to understand fully what that means, Convener, but I'm comforted by the Auditor General's comments that it didn't affect the Scottish budget for 11-12 in terms of outturns at all. So quite content with the response of it.
I mean, I think that's a fair summary, and the kind of two key issues that we raised: who was responsible for the error, and what impact had it had on public spending. I think the answers that we got were very, very clear and reassuring. So Anyone want to suggest anything except noting the correspondence? Can we note this then?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Item 5 is our own annual report. We considered a draft of this at our last meeting. Some suggestions were made, small suggestions were made, I think, for a change, and the clerks have made those suggestions. Does anybody want to suggest any further amendments? Can we agree this as our annual report then?
Yes.
Is that agreed?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bailey's timing is absolutely impeccable. That takes us to item 6 on our agenda. I'll suspend for a couple of minutes to let Mr. Bailey get his breath back and let our witnesses come to the table for item 6, managing early departures from the Scottish public sector. So suspend for 2 minutes. Let's reconvene. A reminder to everybody to switch their phones off again. And we're now considering the Section 23 report, Managing Early Departures from the Scottish Public Sector, and this is a joint Auditor General and Accounts Commission report. So we have with us the Auditor General for Scotland and Mr. Bailey, Chair of the Accounts Commission, along with from Audit Scotland, Fraser McKinlay, Tommy Ewell and Gordon Neal. So welcome to you all, and I'd don't know if one or other of you is going to kick things off. Auditor General.
Thank you, Convener. Our joint report is a bit unusual for us. It's intended very much to remind organisations of the principles of good practice on how they should be managing early departures. It also provides information on the extent to which Scotland's devolved public sector uses early departures and gives some examples of current practice. The principles of good practice are based on the standards set out in the Accounts Commission's report Buy Now, Pay Later, which was published back in 1997. These focused on local government, but the underlying principles are relevant to all public sector organisations. Information on the numbers and costs of early departures is taken from the 2011-12 audited annual accounts of public bodies right across Scotland. This information has been published for the first time in those accounts, and we've taken the opportunity to pull it together, provide a picture across Scotland, and pull out some themes for public sector bodies to be paying attention to themselves. The current practice examples are drawn from the published reports by auditors and from a limited number of case studies, rather than being the result of a formal performance audit that's looked at across the whole of the public sector. In terms of the key messages that we're reporting to you, in 2010-11 and 2011-12, over 14,000 people accepted some form of early departure at an overall cost of around £280 million per year. In broad terms, over 3/4 of these departures cost less than £50,000. In contrast, for 8% of departures, the average cost was more than £100,000, representing around 40% of the cost of early departures in total. The average cost of packages varies between organisations. The highest average costs tend to have been incurred by central government and NHS bodies, reflecting their targets to reduce the number of senior managers by 25% by 2015. The circumstances of individual organisations will vary, and it's up to managers and councillors or board members to ensure that their early departure schemes are tailored to their needs. But the underlying principles of consistent policies, independent checks, value for money, and open reporting to the public apply to everyone. We found that Scotland's public sector organisations follow many of the principles of good practice. There is, however, a range of approaches to the design and management of the early departure schemes, with significant differences in some aspects. The most significant of these are set out in the report, and they cover the costs reported in the annual accounts, the payback periods used to demonstrate value for money, the use of incentives such as added years, and the independent scrutiny that's given to the packages. There is evidence that early departures are now leading to long-term savings for Scotland's public sector, but organisations do need to be more consistent in how they monitor these schemes to help ensure that the planned savings are delivered. They also need to be clearer and more consistent in reporting these savings to the public as a matter of real public interest. Issues relating to individual audited bodies have been addressed as part of the annual audit process. This includes consideration of whether it's appropriate to report to the Public-Audit-Committee here through the Section 22 powers that I have, or to the Accounts Commission through the Controller of Audit's reporting powers as appropriate. Audit Scotland is currently working on a report on reshaping the public sector workforce, which aims to put these departures in the wider context of the shape of public sector workforces for the future to meet the demands that we know are coming and the strategic approach being taken. And that report's due to be published in autumn of this year. We'll be coming back to you then with that bigger picture, but we hope this snapshot and the good practice principles are a good starting point for the committee today, Convener. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Bailey, do you want
No,
to
I have nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay, Mrs. Scanlon.
I was quite shocked, I suppose, at the average cost of early departures, but probably more shocked that the number of staff employed by the Scottish public sector has fallen by 40,000 since 2009. Do we presume that have a percentage of these jobs been filled again? Is this the net reduction in staff in the public sector?
The figure of 40,000 is a net reduction.
Right.
The complication, as we explain in the report, is that it does include some staff who've transferred to arm's length bodies as part of that process as well. Okay. And we've not been able to get accurate enough information to break those figures out. Okay. But it is a net reduction. Well,
I think most people out there would be saying there's 40,000 less employees. So how has that impacted on public services? Have we been able to deliver the same quality of public service with 40,000 less employees?
That's very much the purpose of the work that's currently underway on reshaping the public sector workforce. What we've done here is to take a snapshot based on the information that's in the public domain for the first time about early departures as a chance to restate the principles. And we know that some organisations have, and some of them have had to take a short-term approach to reducing staff where that's been relatively easy to do. But it's obviously important that that's part of a much wider strategic approach to looking ahead at what staff will be needed, changes to the shape of the workforce and so on, and the approaches taken to getting there will be different from the short-term savings that can be made from this sort of move.
But presumably you would not allow anyone to leave if that person or persons were key to the delivery of a quality service. So can we presume that there were 40,000 surplus staff and we can continue to provide a quality of public service with 40,000 less staff?
The extent to which individual people who are expressing an interest in early severance are allowed to leave are critical to service delivery, should be absolutely central to the business plan that's considered in making a decision about it. I'll ask Fraser, if I may, to pick up the broader point about what we know about who's gone and where.
I was going to make a very similar point about the importance of having a clear policy in the first place and then clear business cases for individuals. And what's interesting is that, as we say in the report, the variation of those across the public sector is striking in some places. Some have taken quite a targeted approach to this, some have taken more of a blanket approach. What we are clear about is that they really do need to try and understand what the potential impact is on service delivery. And as Caroline says, that's a key part of the work that we're currently doing and we'll be reporting on in the autumn time.
Final question. If we look at Exhibit 2 on page 11, can we assume that in central government there were 8.4% of staff have left? That was just within the 1 year. It's only looking at 2010-11 and 11-12. So 8.4% have left central government, 3.7 local authorities, 2.1 police and fire, and 0.5 in the NHS. Is this based on the provision of a quality service and value for money, or is it based on budget pressures, efficiency savings, or indeed the protected budget for the NHS? What I'm probably trying to say, are there more savings that could be made in the NHS in comparison? I mean, 0.5 in the NHS compared to 8.4 in central government. It's quite a considerable difference. So what's the reason for such a range?
We think there's a range of differences, a range of factors coming into play here. I suspect it's very true that the fact that the government has made a commitment to protect the NHS budget in real terms is affecting the smaller proportionate number of staff we're seeing going in that sector against, for example, a focus on reducing the costs of other central government spending heads to balance out the impact of NHS protection. We know that some bodies started some time ago in making the changes that they were expecting to need to make over a period of time. Others are coming at it later. Some bodies have got more room for manoeuvre than others. Some are targeting senior managers. So different things are happening in different organisations here. That's very much the purpose of the later piece of work we've got underway, which is about stepping back and looking at the strategic approach people are taking and the longer term direction they are taking in order to make sure they've got the staff they need to deliver their services while still meeting the budgetary pressures that they're facing.
So it would be safe to assume that if the central government can lose 8.4% of staff within 1 year and continue to provide high quality public service, would it be safe to then assume that those efficiencies could be met right across the public sector, or were central government particularly, did they have a surplus of staff in the first place?
I'm not sure it is safe to make that assumption. Different organisations are starting in different places, and this is a snapshot looking at 2 financial years, 2010-11 and 2011-12. That's why we're stepping back to have a look at the strategic approach they're taking more generally.
Mr. Bailey.
Could I be permitted a supplementary on looking at the local authorities in terms of the figures you quoted over, was it about a 10 or 12 year or 14 year span you started with, Ms Scanlon? In the local authorities, the full-time equivalents now are about 235,000. And that peaked a few years back at 260,000. But if you go back to over the period of the type you're talking about, the figures then were about 235,000, so it's gone up and then come back down again.
So sorry, when could you give me when did it go up from 235? The workforce is now 273.
I think it was, the figures from 1999 are about 235, 240,000.
And even with 10,000 departures in 1 year,
well, it's 2 years, yes.
So it was up at 283.
If you go by full-time equivalents, I think it's about 260, about 5 years ago.
So we're looking at, since devolution, 48,000 more employees in local government.
No. What I'm saying is that in 1999 it was about 235, 240,000,
yes.
And it's back down to that level now. It peaked about 5 years ago.
It peaked at 283.
Yes, I think the equivalent figure is 260 full-time equivalent.
260. So it still
it's now back where it was.
Still went up by a huge amount.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Beattie.
I'm looking at page 4, paragraphs 2 and 3, and I'm really looking for a clarification here. £280 million a year is a huge amount of money, and it says 14,000 staff accepted early retirement over that year. Paragraph 3 says there's evidence to show this is leading to savings. In calculating those savings, was it taken into account the fact that is repeated elsewhere in the report, that in some cases, for example, people were rehired on a lower salary to do similar jobs? So, for example, that would eat into the margins, obviously, on the savings. And these savings, do they take into account other forms of costs that have come into losing staff? I'm leaving that open as what they might be.
Certainly on the first one, Mr. Beattie, the savings that we would expect to see, and when business cases are going through for savings, they would include instances where people are posts are being backfilled but on a lower salary. That we would expect only that saving, the marginal saving, to be included in that business case, and I think generally speaking that's how that's done. One of the things we say in the report is that there is a bit of inconsistency about the costs that are included in the business cases, and again I think that's something that our auditors are picking up and will be focusing on even more in the coming audit year to make sure there is greater consistency about what's included in the upfront cost. The issue of savings, in a sense, the frustrating thing for us in this in this piece of work is it's actually quite difficult to get a global figure for the other side of this equation. So all the upfront costs are included in the accounts, and that's where we can get very reliable information from. The information on the subsequent saving from that upfront cost is much more difficult to pin down. So there's a key message for us in this report, which is public bodies need to be absolutely transparent, provide absolute clarity for their board members, for their elected members and for the public about what the investment in early departures is actually delivering in terms of savings.
So just to be clear, your actual evidence about the savings is actually based on the business plan that's put forward by the councils in terms of these departures?
Yes, there is evidence in individual bodies that the departures are leading to savings, yeah.
And that is the only evidence?
Yes.
Okay. And you've already said that there's the quality of these business cases vary. You said in paragraph 6.
Indeed, but I think it's clear that where the quality varies, there is still evidence that pay bills are coming down in public bodies, and that our auditors are satisfied that there is evidence that because there is some monitoring going on across the public sector that when people are going, there is reporting happening about those people going and what's happening as a result of the savings that are being delivered. So we think it could be better, but we are pretty confident that there are some savings being delivered.
Part of that point is again, Caroline Gardner's already mentioned our report coming out in the autumn, and that's going to be looking at that very issue you're talking about, the degree to which savings are then monitored and whether they should be monitored more closely.
Just a final question there. Page 15, paragraph 32, comments made about early departure schemes and how they can effectively reduce the efficiency of organisations in some cases if they're not well managed. Have you seen any evidence of that to date, or is it too early?
I think it is too early to say. This report is very deliberately a snapshot based on the disclosures that were required in the 2011-12 financial statements for the first time. What we are looking at in the wider piece of work on workforce planning is exactly that question of whether people are taking a strategic approach, looking at what they need their workforce to look like in 5 years' time, how much money they'll have to spend in 5 years' time, and going through a process to fit the two together. Or if they are taking a more opportunistic approach, looking for where there may be opportunities to cut costs now without enough focus on what the impact might be on service quality or demand, the question that Mrs. Scanlon was asking earlier. It's obviously important that people are making savings, but doing that in a way which doesn't lead to longer term costs in the future because gaps become apparent or it becomes necessary to refill posts that had been deleted under an early severance scheme.
Thank you. My apologies for being late, earlier, convener. I wonder if I could ask the panel about their paragraphs about compromise agreements. If you found 14,000 staff leaving over 2 years, how many of those 14,000 signed compromise agreements?
I don't think we have that figure. It's, as I say, this is drawn from the annual accounts, and that's not something that's disclosed in the accounts. It's something.
Find out.
It's something which is mentioned by the auditors in their annual reports where they have concerns about it. And as we say in the report, there can be good reasons for the use of compromise agreements as long as they're not used either to suppress information which is properly dealt with through whistleblowing approaches or to hide the cost of settlements from the public.
I understand that, but how would you find out? I mean, how would this committee get that information?
At the moment, they're not required to be reported anywhere.
Shouldn't they be?
I think it's a question for the committee to have a view on. It is something which I suspect could be drawn out through FOI requests if appropriate, and if we felt there was a problem with them on a more general basis, obviously through our audit access powers we could collect that information.
But you'd accept, Auditor General, that we only found out about the manipulation of waiting lists in NHS Lothian because of a whistleblower. Yeah. So the public concern here is very clear that if compromise agreements are being used, and you can't tell me how many are being used across 14,000 people who've left all these public bodies, then I have no idea how extensive this is. Then this could be a very serious issue.
Potentially it could be, but I have to say we haven't found any evidence that it is. We focused here on the general picture as it stands at the moment, and the team may have a bit more to say about the examples that we have commented on here. We know that in the NHS particularly, further guidance has been given out to health boards about their use and about the circumstances in which they should not be used. And in the report on waiting times, we were very clear about the importance of both the culture and systems that enable people to raise their concerns about health services and other public services when that's appropriate.
I wonder why additional guidance was provided then. That suggests this was systemic or endemic across the public sector, and therefore whoever produced this guidance, I don't know if it was government guidance or whose guidance, but more guidance had to be produced.
I think the guidance was produced in response to public concerns at the time, rather than to evidence that there were problems in the use of compromise agreements, but the team may be able to help me out with more information about that.
I think the first thing to say is that I'll speak to the team that's working on the reshaping the workforce performance audit to check how easy or difficult it will be for us to get that information, Mr. Scott, so we can certainly take that away and look at how we can gather that information about compromise agreements. I think the point we're keen to make in here, and I have to say the concerns that we've had as auditors on occasion has been more to do with the way in which public money is being withheld, if you like, from and the transparency of that rather than a concern around whistleblowing in the sense that you're getting at, I think. So the couple of examples that certainly I've come across in local government have been more about not making transparent the amount of public money that has been spent on a departure, which we're very clear quite often isn't appropriate for a compromise agreement. I think there is a bit of a thing that compromise agreements were created really to do with employment law and to manage risk on both sides, and from that point of view they're not a bad thing. My sense is that over time they've maybe developed and more things have been included in there, so that's why we make the very clear statement that they should not be used to stop people blowing the whistle or to avoid transparency of public money being spent.
I completely accept that, and paragraph 58 is very clear on that point. My point is I don't know, and it strikes me you don't know either how extensive this is. So,
yeah, that's fair.
So can I ask, but maybe if you can come back to the committee on that, that would be extraordinarily helpful. Can I ask one other question, Convener, around paragraph 38 in respect of organisations should have up-to-date policies and procedures. Paragraph 38 is about Scottish enterprise. I'm reading between the lines, and therefore please do correct me, but this paragraph seems to suggest to me that Scottish enterprise have, again, endemically or systematically been paying over the odds compared to other parts of the public sector in relation to getting rid of staff. And also you say in that paragraph that they've been doing it in a targeted way, which strikes me as they haven't been doing it across the organisation. They've decided as a board and presumably as a management team they want to get rid of certain people, and they've been doing it and they've been using it in that way. Would that be a fair assessment of your paragraph 38?
Two questions there, I think, relating to Scottish enterprise. The first is about the scheme itself, and it's certainly true that the scheme they were operating last year was more generous than the general civil service scheme. The Scottish Government had approved that while giving them a steer that they should be looking to reduce the contractual obligations that they had to members of staff. As with much of this, some of it goes back a long way to the point where either the schemes were introduced or individual people were appointed and contracts entered into with them. So that's certainly the case. In relation to the scheme being targeted, the auditor did identify that it wasn't a scheme that in that round had been made known to everybody, although the organisation were clear that the scheme was on its website and people were able to apply. The management team and the board had used it in a targeted way to identify where they thought there was room to reduce the size of the workforce and particular posts, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Again, going back to the earlier questions about the balance between cost saving and the impact on services, as long as the business case is clear why particular roles have been targeted, that's not necessarily a criticism. This is one because of the number of departures and the cost of departures involved that I know the auditors are keeping a close eye on for the future. So we will have good visibility on what's happening here.
And thank you. And on the number and cost, what was the number and cost, broadly speaking, over the 2 years in relation to Scottish enterprise?
The annexes to the report give a bit of information about Annex 2, proportion of staff taking early departure, and the average cost of early departure packages are shown in both. For Scottish enterprise, the average cost was a little over £100,000 last year, and the proportion of staff going is actually lower because of the size of the organisation. So I think it's a small number of higher cost packages, which ties into the targeted approach being taken.
Very grateful for that advice. Why did they run such a scheme that was clearly so advantageous to those leaving compared to other parts of the public sector? Why were they allowed to get away with that?
That's not a question I can answer for you. It is a scheme which was in line with the general contract entitlements of staff in Scottish enterprise, and which had been approved by the Scottish Government.
So it'd be legitimate to ask accountable officers and others as to why that happened and how that plan was agreed.
That's a matter for the committee.
For others, yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Dornan.
Thank you, Convener. Just to go back to the issue that was raised by Mary Scanlon, and you brought in the matter of ALIOs. If there's 40,000 staff have gone from local authority, and you say that a number of them have went to ALIOs, is there any way, surely there must be a way that we can find out how many have been transferred over, which would mean then, given that's just a semi-detached arm of local government really, it would mean then it would have a much more accurate figure.
Yes, we're actually doing work right now to try and get a much closer handle on the very point you raise. Just to clarify, what I was saying was in 1999, the full-time equivalents were about 235. That's what it is today, or rather in the time of this report. It went up and then came down again. So, but in terms of ALIOs, that masks the amount that have gone to ALIOs during that time as well, which is, I guess, behind your point to some extent. Yes. So we're doing, the short answer is we're doing work on that just now to see if we can get more full and better particulars, if you like, on the ALIO side of it, because it's a concern of the Accounts Commission, just the whole governance of ALIOs.
But would that also include these early payoffs for ALIOs? I mean, because again, there's lots of public money are being spent, and we've got this whole report here, which doesn't include, again, that sort of semi-detached arm of local authority.
I think I'm right in saying that it does not include the ALIOs in the figures you have in this report.
No. But the further one, the future one, will that include this?
That I'd have to check and get back to you on, but the first stage is to find out the scale of the transfers from local authority to ALIOs and take it from there. Okay. The problem we have with ALIOs, which is the direct concern of the Accounts Commission, is that this public money has been transferred out of the reach of external scrutiny, except for the accounts. There's no right for the Accounts Commission to go and assess the performance of ALIOs, as we have with anything else within the public sector, within the local authority world, and it's a concern of ours.
Okay, thanks for that. Can I just ask another question? On page 7, paragraph 4, you talk about organisations need to be clear about how they assess the full value for money of early departure schemes. Would it be your intention to come up with some suggested best practice agreed method across the board about how they should be doing this?
That's what this report does. It sets out the principles which people should be applying, and is very clear that the cost which should be disclosed in the accounts under the new requirement is both the immediate cost to the employer, but also the capital cost of added years or strain on the fund where that is incurred. Gordon, do you want to add to that in terms of the particular good practice principles we're setting out here?
As Caroline says, we're trying to promote principles of good practice. For us, it's difficult to be prescriptive about some of the details. So, for example, what payback period should be used, or should organisations be using incentives like added years? Because the circumstances of each organisation will vary. They'll be under different pressures, they'll be in different circumstances. So it's difficult to come up with very precise, you know, two added years is appropriate, or payback period should be up to 3 years. It depends.
Would be some method of suggesting, and maybe it's here and I've missed it, but some method of suggesting how it should be, and that you have to justify if you're out with that norm, so that there is a sort of uniformity of process?
Well, as I say, it's difficult to come up with a simple figure. What I would say is every early departure should be supported by a business case. The business cases should have full transparency in terms of costs, in terms of the immediate costs, in terms of long-term costs. I think questions should be asked if you get particularly long payback periods. Let's say 6 years, I would expect non-execs or councillors to be asking, or the auditors. But beyond that, it's difficult to be prescriptive.
Thanks. Yeah, I think the point Gordon makes, we've mentioned in para 48 in the report, where we say that in relation to the payback period, the longer the payback period, the greater the risk that anticipated savings will not be realised, and organisations need to ensure that payback periods they are using are justified and represent value for money. So as Gordon says, rather than us coming up with a number, what we're absolutely clear about is that the organisations and the governance processes need to be clear as to why, if they're adding years, for example, why they're doing that. If it's a particular payback period, why is it that payback period and not another period? So that's why we've gone with the principles of good practice rather than trying to be too specific on it.
I do recognise.
Sorry, if with Mr. Dornan's forbearance, can I follow up? Because I wanted to ask about this. I mean, I find it astonishing that it's up to the organisation itself what payback period they use to calculate the saving. And that seems to me to be about the accountancy. That's about the accounts rather than anything else. And there are you know, there are requirements which are rather stronger than good principles when it comes to accounting. People, these organisations cannot present their accounts as and how they feel might suit their case. And yet, here, we've got something where it seems to me what Gordon is saying is, well, all we can do is say this is good practice. Are there not accounting, I was going to say guidelines, but legislation to do with this transparency? It just seems astonishing to me that the organisation can decide whether the payback period they're applying is 1 year, 2 years or 6 years. It just seems nonsensical. I'm not an accountant, but it just seems really strange to me. And I think to Mr Dornan as well.
The payback period is a sort of useful shorthand that I think helps people making decisions to focus on the numbers that are in play here, the costs up front and the savings that come in. The business case should be based on a net present value calculation of the costs over a period of time and the savings over a period of time. The concern we've got, I think, is that the payback period is helpful as that rule of thumb, but it's not the full answer. And in any case, the longer you're assuming savings over, the harder it becomes to be clear they've actually been achieved in practice, because so many other things will be changing at the same time. I can see Tommy wants to come in to add a bit of flesh to the bones on that.
No, I think just, pardon me, in general, the schemes that we were looking at and what has been reported by organisations was payback periods between 1 and 3 years. Now, that was for the schemes overall, so in individual circumstances that might be higher. We don't have kind of any kind of information kind of on that, but there may be kind of other factors that are being considered as part of that. For example, if the organisation is looking to restructure, they might take that into consideration and kind of sacrifice a longer payback period than they might ordinarily have done, or if they're looking to kind of make quick savings, they might go the other way. So it really does depend on the individual factors affecting each organisation.
I mean, I'm not sure that Mr Dornan and I are asking about the business case for the saving here. We're asking about how the information is presented transparently, but I'll let Mr Dornan back in, because
just on that very point, maybe to some extent is the crux of the matter. If you did have that it should be between 1 and 3 years, and then you had to have an exceptional case made for being out with that, that might in some way may go some way towards what we're looking at.
Seems to me that just as in the private sector, when codes are developed, Cadbury and all the things that follow from that, there may be scope here for a parliamentary committee to take evidence in this more generally and come to some guidelines that it may wish to issue. I think that is perhaps a way to deal with it.
No. So can I also just add, I think it links back to one of the points that the Auditor General made earlier. It's been difficult for us during this audit to see the savings that are actually being achieved by organisations. There's not as much kind of transparency or public reporting in the savings as there are on the costs. And the payback periods are kind of directly linked to that. So, I mean, that's where the kind of difficulty and challenges came from for ourselves in terms of linking the information that we have or don't have in savings to the payback periods can be quite challenging.
Pain on that. That's why that's why Mr Dornan and I are so concerned about it. Mr Bailey.
Yeah. Could I just offer, if you were to undertake a broader study of this, it seems to all of us, I think, I'm sure I speak for everyone, that part of the criteria should be looking at the terms for appointment as well, because sometimes by the time you get to early departures, the pass has been sold and there's not much, you're locked into a position.
Mention that, the report does mention that as well. Okay, Mr Doris.
Thank you very much, Convener. Good morning. I was struck by something Mary Scanlon said earlier in relation to the number of early departures, the percentage of early departures with the NHS compared to other areas. I'm glad that we do see that, because obviously that is connected to the protection of the NHS budget and the above inflation increases within it. But that's not the reason for mentioning the NHS. It's because the NHS is becoming increasingly clearer in terms of whether it's workforce management tools, whether it's workload management tools, and we've now even got a bed management tool being developed. In other words, they're becoming ever increasingly focused on what the demands are on the NHS and how they have a medium and long-term strategy to restructure the NHS to deliver on those demands. And of course, staffing is the largest fixed cost, is a significant part of that. So whether it's more nurses in the community or whether it's less acute beds, there's always knock-on consequences for staffing. So if we were to take that model over to local authorities, for example, when local authorities decide that they're going to offer early retirement or early departure of staff, do they start off from a basis of thinking about how they would be keen to restructure and then see where that means they would need less staff, and therefore then what they would do is they would, if you like, have a fishing exercise to see how many staff in a department would seek to wish early departure, given the fact that we're hoping all local authorities are going to not be involved in early redundancy? In other words, are local authorities just saying who wants to leave, or is there a method to their approach to this?
Try to answer that from the other end, and you can obviously tell me if I've answered it. One of our concerns is that there's not enough long-term planning done in local authorities, whether it's financial or workforce strategy, and we keep raising this point. And as you're suggesting, if you start with a workforce strategy, you then know for the future if you're going to have the right people at the right time in the right place. There's not enough of that done. And so that would then lead you to another place that suggests that at least some of it is an invitation for people to take early departure if they're so minded. I'll leave Fraser to elaborate on that if he wishes.
Thanks, John. And I think the picture is very varied in local government. They do it differently. So there are some councils that have taken an approach of offering it very widely, seeing what comes from that, and then in a sense redesigning the service as a result of what comes forward. There are others who have done it the other way around and who have said we want to redesign this service and doing it in a more targeted way and managing it that way round. So across the 32 councils there is real variation both in how much it's used at all, and the appendices at the back give you a sense of the difference there, and also if they are doing it, how they're going about it. So I guess it reflects the much more diverse nature of local authorities than, for example, in the NHS, where it tends to be a more whole systems approach. The work that we're doing at the moment that we'll be reporting in the autumn is looking in more depth at a variety of case studies from all different sectors, and we are pulling out some really good examples of practice in councils as we are in other parts of the organisation, so that it's not really one clear picture across the whole local authority sector.
More importantly, I suppose, what would best practice be? It seems a little bit counterintuitive to say who in this local authority would like to leave. They then decide under whatever criteria is laid down, and the local authority decides, okay, let's move the deck chairs around this ship to kind of suit. Is there a best practice approach to this? Should local authorities be looking to see how they could reduce headcount and restructure the service to make it truly more efficient, or should they do the fishing exercise of staff first? What's the most appropriate way to go about it?
I would pick up the Chair's point about it needing to be, the good practice is to be clear about what your workforce planning strategy is longer term, and that should be linked to the needs of the service and how you want to deliver the service in future. But I think you don't necessarily have to do all of that stuff and then go to the early departures piece. You can kind of do some of that at the same time if you like. It doesn't have to be an entirely sequential thing, but what we would expect to see is a plan. You would expect to see a strategy that says this is where we need to get to for the following reasons. The way in which you get to that point might well differ depending on the circumstances, how much money you need to save and over what period of time, those kinds of things.
Okay, I think I'm a little bit clearer on that. One of the things in relation to best practice that was mentioned is there should be clear policies and procedures that are consistently applied in relation to early departure. And I'm not picking in Glasgow here, but Glasgow's my point of reference. I'm giving this as an example. This could be widespread across the country. I just have no idea. I think I previously raised it in private session, one of the things Glasgow City Council did was they did a kind of fishing exercise of staff which included social work staff in terms of those that wanted early departure. And I know a couple of my constituents then put in for early departure and then were told, well, actually, no, you can't get it. At the same time, or fairly soon afterwards, the head of service, the head of social work was given an early departure package, is my understanding, and no harm to David Crawford at all. I hope he's doing well in his next challenge. However, the inconsistency perceived by individual members of staff in relation to that decision. So I suppose what I'm asking is, how are local authorities handling that fishing exercise? Who would like to leave? And when someone puts in to say, yes, they would like to an early departure, to then be refused that, would that be consistent with the clear policies and procedures being applied on a consistent basis? And again, let's move this away from my home local authority. There's 32 local authorities in Scotland. It's more about where the pitfalls are and how you apply that part of best practice.
May I start? I think moving it away to the general, as you suggest, you would expect councils to explain fully what the offer is to whatever group of staff the offer is put to, and perhaps it's a communication issue rather as much as anything else. That way, at least, the expectations are managed among certain groups of people. So if that's fully explained in the first place, then the rest would seem to follow from it, wouldn't it?
In a sense, I think there's a link to Mr. Scott's question earlier about whether targeting schemes is a good thing or a bad thing. If the aim of the exercise that any public body is going through is to reduce the number of senior managers, then it may be entirely appropriate, subject to the business cases for individuals, to allow senior managers to go while maintaining employment in social work or teaching or anywhere else where the staff are required to deliver the service. That's the point, I think, that we're looking for in terms of having both a very clear strategy for the way the workforce needs to change over time and a policy which is consistent in terms of the principles for how people will be treated as part of that.
Perhaps in reflection, you shouldn't have mentioned the senior director. It wasn't an attempt to focus on that particular decision. I have to say it was more about how you make sure the expectations of the staff in relation to the possibility of early departure are handled. I think I'm a little bit clearer now, Convener. It's about being very focused when you do that fishing exercise, that this is not to say you will have early departure, or merely doing an audit for those whose aspiration would be to leave if the option was available, and that's perhaps not always the case in local authorities, but thank you for that.
Yeah, Mr. Coffey.
Thank you very much, Convener. Could I pick up the point about the estimate of savings with our panel? Auditor General, you said that there is evidence that early departures are leading to long-term savings, and I was wondering if there are any figures to back it up. And it seems to me it's possibly a simplistic analysis here, though, but if the year one cost is £280 million, doesn't that mean that the year two saving is automatically £280 million? The costs are one-off, but the savings are recurring to a point beyond which it's probably ridiculous to continue to claim after so many years of an organisation changing. But in broad terms, though, surely the year 2 and 3 savings must be equivalent to the year 1 costs. So if that's a reasonable assumption, I would like your view on that. I think it was Mr. McKinley that was...
I'll ask Tommy to come in on the detail, but in answer to the specific question on timing, it depends when the people leave. So in accounting terms, you can actually, if you like, book the upfront cost at the point of the decision being made. That person may not actually leave the organisation for a year or potentially 2 years after that. So there can be a bit of a time lag in terms of when you would see the savings coming through. What we are clear about is the business case should be very clear about that. So that would be why you wouldn't necessarily see it 1 year to the next. Tommy, do you want to?
I think again, pardon me, it just depends on the individual kind of scheme. I think in the NHS, most of the organisations claim to be achieving that saving within a year, but in the NHS they don't tend to offer added years, so they don't have that kind of element of cost. For other organisations, it really depends on how long the person's worked for, what their salary is. I think there's an example in the report where we've tried to kind of set out the kind of various costs that can be incurred. So if, for example, some organisations were offering kind of 4 or 6 2/3 added years, those costs also have to be met, which leads to the kind of payback period, the longer payback periods. As we kind of said earlier, the payback periods generally range from 1 to 3 years. So if the payback period was 3 years, the initial cost hasn't been recovered for that period. It will take 3 years to recover the initial outlay. Does that answer your question?
Sort of, really. But what is the evidence then? What is the nature of the evidence then? And is it numeric, or is it, what is the basis for the evidence to say that we are making the savings that we are quite clearly we must be making? If you've got a one-off cost of £280 million that you're not incurring in year 2, that is.
Individual organisations, or good practice is that each kind of application needs to be supported by a business case. These business cases should set out the savings, and these have been looked at in individual organisations. Organisations also within their kind of reports are claiming kind of the savings that have been made, are claiming payback periods. Some of these have been looked at, some haven't, but that's the basis for the evidence.
And in places where, I think there's a bit of a difference sometimes, Mr Coffey, between the public reporting and reporting to boards and members and then what's actually there when you get underneath it. So there's been occasions in some of the case study sites and through our routine audit work where we've used some of the examples in this report, where if we look at maybe a very high level report that's gone to elected members, our auditors have actually then gone and said, well, can you show me your workings? And when we do that, it gives us reassurance that there is tracking, that there is actually evidence that people have gone and savings are being made. The bit that isn't happening as well as we would like, I think, is the transparency of that for elected members, board members, and ultimately the public. So there's a message in here about elevating all of that, I think, and bringing more transparency to the process, because when you go looking for it as auditors, quite often it is actually there.
Okay.
Mr Bibby.
Thanks, Convener. You mentioned earlier 40% of the costs were for 8% of the departures, and Mr Scott asked about Scottish Enterprise and the numbers involved. And you mentioned Appendix 2. Obviously, that's a proportion of staff in Scottish Enterprise. The other organisation with average early departures over £100,000 was the Scottish Funding Council. Do you know? Are you able to tell us what the number of people involved at Scottish Enterprise and the Scottish Funding Council were?
The Scottish Funding Council, over the 2 years that we looked at, there was only 3 departures, a total cost of £340,000. Within the Scottish Funding Council's accounts, they actually highlight that they have targeted kind of senior managers, and it was part of a kind of restructuring process. In Scottish Enterprise, 47 people left over the 2 years at a cost of just under £5.2 million.
Okay, so 47 people received £5.2 million.
Yes.
The total figure.
Not quite. That was the total cost. It's not that those people got that money.
Right. Okay.
There is a bit of a difference.
Okay. In terms of I was just wanting to ask a general question about the comparison. We've just compared the local authorities to the NHS. I'd just like to ask your thoughts on comparing local authorities to central government budget. The average cost, I think, for local authorities was £37,000, and the average cost for central government was £43,000. Does this tell us local authorities are more efficient in dealing with these issues, or is it the case that the profile of the people that have been leaving under early departures in local authorities are lower paid workers compared to people on higher salaries in Scottish Government?
I'll start and then maybe ask Tommy or Gordon to come in. I mean, the first thing, I guess, to notice is the numbers are much bigger in absolute terms in local government. But there's no doubt that one of the things in central government is the explicit policy of reducing the number of senior managers by 25%. And also central government has seen quite a significant amount of restructuring, mergers, a commitment from the government to reduce the number of public bodies. So all of that means that as those restructurings are going through, it tends to be the more senior people that are leaving. So you would expect to see that figure being a bit higher.
Yeah, I just agree with Fraser's comments.
It depends on the profile of the workforce at the point at which you address the early departure scheme. You could have a workforce that's more mature and therefore more expensive, or vice versa. You know, there are various things that I don't think you can read too much into a comparison one sector with another without going into the profiles of the working population in each case.
I had a couple other questions to finish off. In paragraph 25 of the report, you say there is a risk that some organisations are unaware of the true costs of early retirements or redundancies to revenue budgets or to pension funds. Decisions made in response to short-term pressures can lead to long-term costs. I mean, I just wonder what the risk is. Why is there a risk? Is that because these organisations are incompetent, or there doesn't seem to be any explanation as to why that risk exists? And I also wonder if it's based on examples where you've seen decisions made in response to short-term pressures which have meant the organisation hasn't taken proper account of the costs. What's behind that paragraph?
I think what we're picking up there is the general risk, rather than specific risks we've seen coming through the audited accounts over the last couple of years. Certainly when the Commission first produced its guidance, Buy Now, Pay Later, back in 1997, there were examples of councils making decisions about early retirement in particular that weren't taking account of the cost of the strain on the fund and the cost of added years. We haven't found big examples of that happening now, although there is a bit of inconsistency in the way that's reported, as we highlight in the report. But it's a theoretical risk, and it's why the principles that we're setting out here are so important. Those costs are likely much more significant than the short-term cost that the person receives.
So it's a risk based on past examples of problems?
If I can put it this way, Convener, it's an audit risk. It's one of those sort of hypothetical risks we're aware of that our audit work is intended to keep an eye on.
Okay. I also wanted to ask, in paragraph 43, and it is really only paragraph 43, you treat what actually is one of the most publicly visible manifestations of what we're discussing, which is those, and I accept they are very few cases, where staff take early retirement and then immediately return to the same job. And because it's something, I think, which has happened in the case of very senior members of the workforce, the figures involved, certainly to the public's view, seem quite egregious. So you talk about the example of Strathclyde Fire and Rescue and their Chief Fire Officer, for example. My concern about this paragraph is similar to the concern that myself and Mr. Dornan talked about earlier in terms of consistency of how things are done in the payback period. I mean, what this it seems clear to me from this paragraph that the report thinks this is a bad thing, that in general terms people should not be taking early retirement and then returning to their job on the following day. Yet there doesn't seem to be any suggestion of a way in which this could consistently be stopped. I mean, the paragraph says Dumfries and Galloway Council, for example, has recently announced an intention to place restrictions on the future recruitment of individuals who have accepted any form of early departure. I mean, maybe I'm naive, but certainly in my past lives where, for example, there's been redundancy schemes and people receive payments to leave an organisation, it would be normal practice that there was a restriction on them coming back and working for that same organisation again. And yet, this paragraph suggests that all we can hope for is that the many organisations in the public sector might see fit to put that kind of restriction in place. Is there no mechanism whereby this kind of practice can be essentially outlawed in the Scottish public sector, because it creates fury when it happens in many instances?
It's certainly our view, as we say in paragraph 43, that there should be controls to stop this happening. There are rare instances where there may be a business case for it happening. And I'm going to ask Fraser to pick this up because he's thought long and hard about it, specifically in the context of Strathclyde Fire and Rescue as Controller of Audit.
Sorry, just before bring Fraser in a will, who would control it? Who would be responsible for that control then?
I'm not sure there's any single person or body that is. Certainly audit can't make it a requirement. We can set good practice principles as we've done in this paper. But for example, for central government bodies, I think it would have to be the Scottish Government. The same applies for the NHS. For local government, I guess it would have to be an agreement by individual local authorities, perhaps with COSLA. There isn't a single place where it would happen.
Thank you. Sorry, Fraser.
No, and that's absolutely fine. Thank you, Convener. And employment, there are employment law considerations in all of this too, because equally there are employment law considerations about banning people from reapplying for a job or being reappointed to a post if left. So it is not a straightforward policy area for us. I think, and as Caroline says, and John was obviously also very closely involved in the Strathclyde Fire and Rescue one, the main criticisms we had there were not so much about the fact of him being reappointed into the post. Although people have a view about that, that wasn't against the rules in that sense. What wasn't any good was the way they went about it. The process, his involvement in it, the transparency of what they were doing, why they were doing it, and how much it was going to cost. So for us, our real interest in all of that is the transparency of the process, and as Caroline says, making our expectation as clear as we can be from the audit side that if you're doing it, it needs to be absolutely in the exceptional circumstances, and you need to be absolutely clear why you're doing it.
Mr. Bailey.
And likewise, as part of the same, it happens to be that case, but you can extrapolate it more broadly. It's simply the issue that, as well as a need for proper governance, and there wasn't in that case, another deficiency was a lack of proper options appraisal. And that's something you could extrapolate over every case. It's business case, yes, but that business case is developed having considered all the options. And it's important, just as it is with any other part of local authority or the public sector, if you're going to do something, have you considered all the choices you have available to you? And is this where we want to go? Then you start narrowing down into business cases.
But when you say consideration of all the options, you mean all the options for the organisation and which would be best for them. Is the problem in some of these instances not that there is consideration of the options, but what they're considering is what's the best option for the member of staff involved?
Well, I think that's the essence of my concern, that the options should be what's best for the organisation in the interest of the public. What's the public benefit? And you go from there.
Excellent. Mrs. Scanlon has a quick supplementary.
Just a very brief point to be sure about this. The report, the joint report you're doing in October, Reshaping Scotland's Public Sector Workforce, can I just check, given the questions today from myself and other colleagues, in Appendix 4, the Principles of Good Practice, you do say organisations should ensure they retain sufficient skills and experience before authorising individual early departures. And you also say, under policies and procedures, that they should cover restrictions on any return to employment within the organisation or sector. So can we assume that these 2 points, which have been widely included in the questioning today, can we assume that you will be looking at these principles of good practice and bringing it forward in your report in October with a more in-depth study as to whether or not they have been followed with the departures in the public sector?
We're actually planning to pick up the principles of good practice more directly through the audits of the 230 or so bodies that between us we audit across the public sector. Our auditors will be looking to see, first of all, the scale of early departures in the bodies they're auditing, and then doing some work to look at how far the principles are being applied. And if there are concerns in the bodies that fall within my remit, the way they would come back to this committee is through the Section 22 reporting powers that I have.
And those 2 specific points, we can look forward to a more thorough and in-depth study and more information being available in the report that you bring to us in October on these 2 issues.
That actually isn't the focus of the workforce planning report. That's stepping back a bit to look at the points you raised earlier this morning about whether or not organisations are taking a strategic approach. Okay. We will, on the basis of this morning's conversation, though, look at whether we can keep an eye on information about the extent to which early departures are happening and the extent to which good practice principles are being applied in terms of reporting to you, either case by case or across the piece.
Okay, thank you. And that ends the session. Thank you very much to all our witnesses. The committee will now move into private session, so I'll ask the press and public to leave. Thank you.